All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture the scene, okay? It's the late 2nd century CE. You're on the freezing, mud-soaked front lines of the Marcomannic Wars, somewhere near modern-day Vienna. You are the absolute ruler of the Roman Empire, commanding legions in this brutal, exhausting campaign against invading tribes. Yet, in the quiet, freezing hours of the night, what are you doing? You're not plotting political revenge, and you're certainly not basking in your immense wealth. No, you are huddling over a piece of parchment, secretly writing in a private journal, in Greek, literally just to keep yourself sane. This is the absolutely incredible true story of Marcus Aurelius.
So think about the wild paradox of this guy. He literally owned the known world. I mean, he could have anything he wanted with the snap of his fingers. Luxury, indulgence, absolute tyranny, the whole shebang. Yet he chose to live a life governed by rigorous self-discipline and philosophy. So the big question is, how exactly does the most powerful man on earth stay grounded when pretty much everyone else in history seems to go mad with that level of power?
Well, he actually answered that question for himself with this brutally honest reminder. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Think about how powerful that is. This wasn't some cheesy motivational poster he hung on his wall. This was a vital, urgent reminder to himself to live a life of virtue right in the present moment. Because death was constantly hovering over him, both on the battlefield and back home.
To really wrap our heads around his mindset, we've got to grasp the sheer scale of his authority. You can see it perfectly captured in this magnificent bronze equestrian statue of him. Marcus Aurelius was the last of the 5 good emperors, ruling over the very end of the Pax Romana, which was this golden age of relative peace and stability for the Roman Empire. But as we're going to see as we go through this, his actual time on the throne was anything but peaceful.
Section 1. The Philosopher-King, a boy marked for greatness.
So born into a family of just staggering wealth back in 121 CE, young Marcus was clearly marked for greatness from the get-go. You can really see the tension that defined his whole life right here. On one side, you've got the aulicum fastigium, the extravagant pomp of the imperial court that was completely expected of him. But on the other side, that's what he actually wanted. Heavily influenced by his tutors, he enthusiastically adopted the diatribi. We're talking wearing a rough, scratchy Greek cloak and literally sleeping on the hard floor until his mom actually had to beg him to use a bed. Basically, he was a philosopher trapped in a prince's life.
Section 2. A reluctant heir, the path to power.
That feeling of being trapped actually gave Marcus what's called horror imperia, basically a genuine, deep-seated dread of absolute power. But just look at how this absurdly convoluted succession plan trapped him anyway. So Emperor Hadrian is trying to secure the future of the empire, right? He picks a successor, who promptly dies. So in 138 CE, Hadrian adopts Antoninus Pius, but with a massive catch. Antoninus must immediately adopt a 17-year-old Marcus. Just like that, boom, the reluctant teenage philosopher is shoved right to the front of the line. What followed was this massive, decades-long apprenticeship, kind of perfectly represented by him riding in the triumphal chariot here. For over 20 years, he worked tirelessly alongside his adoptive father, Emperor Antoninus Pius. He served as consul multiple times, learning the incredibly intricate, frankly exhausting daily business of Roman government. By the time Antoninus passed away in 161 CE and Marcus became co-emperor, he was highly trained and ready, and boy did he need to be.
Section 3. War, plague, and duty, the crises.
Because literally the moment Marcus takes the throne, the Pax Romana just completely shatters. Instead of quiet days reading philosophy, he gets hit by a relentless cascade of global disasters. A revitalized Parthian Empire attacks in the east. Germanic tribes completely breach the northern defenses. And honestly, worst of all, returning soldiers brought back the Antonine Plague, wiping out anywhere from 5 to 10 million people, including his own co-emperor Lucius Verus. The entire crumbling world was suddenly entirely on his shoulders.
So, how do you even wake up every day facing wars, a collapsing economy, and a literal plague without just completely losing your mind? Well, you live by this exact quote. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus aggressively applied the Stoic habit of focusing strictly on what he could control. Look, he couldn't control the weather, the invading armies, or the terrifying spread of disease. He could only control his own actions, his own words, and his attitude.
And his actions were incredibly focused. Despite the constant warfare and his own failing health, he wasn't just hiding out in some command tent. He was deeply involved in the daily administration of the empire.
Professional jurists of his time actually praised him for his meticulous legal work. He spent an immense amount of time hearing disputes, specifically focusing on protecting the vulnerable. We're talking overseeing the manumission, or the freeing of slaves, acting as the guardian of orphans, and carefully choosing local city councilors. He was essentially the ultimate imperial ombudsman.
Section 4. Writing the Meditations. A private journal.
Which kind of brings us right back to those freezing front lines, completely surrounded by death and disease. To just survive it all, he began to write. But here is the absolutely crucial point to remember. What we now call meditations was never meant for us to read. These are fragmentary, deeply personal reflections. He wasn't writing some pretentious self-help book for the masses. In fact, some historians point out there's an almost panicked repetition in these pages. He was actively writing to nerve himself for his daunting responsibilities, to remind himself to be good and to just endure.
A massive part of that endurance really came down to this actionable Stoic concept of Amor Fati. It basically means loving your fate, not just sort of accepting it, but actively wishing that everything happens exactly as it actually will, rather than wishing for a different reality. Marcus cultivated this deep sense of gratitude, even in the absolute worst of times. By leaning into his discomfort rather than fighting it, he maintained a profound mental resilience that literally kept the empire from fracturing.
Section 5. A lasting legacy. Beyond the empire.
So Marcus Aurelius passed away in 180 CE, and under his son Commodus, the physical Roman Empire eventually, well, it crumbled. But here is the ultimate plot twist of history. His private, secret diary did not. Those desperate notes he scribbled in the mud actually survived. Passed down across centuries, Meditations sold over 100,000 copies in 2019 alone. The private thoughts of a reluctant emperor are actively guiding CEOs, athletes, and everyday people through their own personal crises nearly 2,000 years later.
Which really leaves us with this final, kind of striking thought. We all face our own versions of chaos, right? Stress at work, overwhelming news, difficult relationships. But if a man burdened with the weight of the entire ancient world, actively battling plagues and endless wars, could sit down in the freezing cold and find the strength to master his own internal reactions, well, how will you choose to face your chaos today? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.